The story revolves around two twin brothers, talented young lawyers determined to expose corruption in the judicial system. From being slighted in a case to overthrowing a biased judge, they quickly discover that injustice does not stop with one individual, but a web of power and corruption, extending all the way to the Attorney General, and even a powerful senator. Let's hear how these two young lawyers, with their intelligence, strategy, and courage, will take down each person behind this corrupt system. The courtroom was suffocatingly silent. The only sound was the rhythmic tapping of Judge Gerald Whitmore's fingers against his high wooden bench. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with slicked-back silver hair and a perpetual smirk that had crushed the confidence of countless attorneys before. His reputation preceded him: tough, ruthless, and undeniably biased. He leaned forward now, his smirk widening, eyes glinting with amusement as they locked onto the two men standing at the defense table. "Let me get this straight," Whitmore said, his voice oozing condescension as he lazily shook his head. "You two think you're qualified to argue in my courtroom? You? Of all people?" Across from him, standing tall in their sharp navy suits, were Jordan and John Carter. Identical twins, both in their early 30s, their presence demanded attention. They were young, confident, and carried themselves with the kind of poise that only came from knowing they had earned their place. Their hands were clasped together in front of them, their postures rigid, their faces unreadable. They didn't flinch. They didn't waver. The prosecution snickered. Spectators whispered among themselves. The room was thick with unspoken judgment. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. "Tell me, gentlemen," he continued, his smirk deepening, "did you two pull those suits off a clearance rack? Or maybe you got lost on your way to the janitor's closet?" Laughter rippled through the courtroom. The prosecution chuckled. The court officers smirked. Even a few reporters, their pens poised over notepads, exchanged knowing glances. But Jordan and John exchanged a glance of their own, one filled with silent understanding, a storm brewing behind their calm expressions. Then, with a sharp breath, Jordan stepped forward. "Your Honor," he said, his voice smooth but firm, every syllable deliberate, "we were hoping to keep this professional, but since you insist on making a spectacle out of us." John stepped forward, his voice cutting through the laughter like a blade. "We'll give you the show you want." The judge's smirk didn't waver, but something in his posture shifted, like an animal sensing an oncoming storm. Boom. A loud, sudden sound filled the room. It wasn't an explosion. It was the thunderous impact of case files, hundreds of pages slamming onto the defense table. The laughter stopped. John had dropped the files with force, the sheer weight of the documents shaking the desk. Thick, towering stacks of legal research, airtight arguments, and undeniable evidence sat before them like a mountain of truth. The judge's eyes flicked to the documents, then back to the brothers. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Jordan flipped open the first file. According to Case Law 1827B, he read aloud, his voice carrying through the dead silent room, "Discrimination in the courtroom is an offense punishable by." "That's enough," Whitmore snapped, his amusement vanishing in an instant. "Oh," Jordan said, his smile cold and knowing, "we're just getting started." The entire room sat frozen. The same people who had laughed moments ago were now on the edge of their seats. No one was laughing now. 3 weeks earlier, Jordan and John Carter had been just two ordinary men walking through the towering halls of the Chicago Superior Courthouse. They weren't dressed in sharp suits that day. Instead, they wore simple, everyday clothes, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed lawyer. And that was the point. "Are you sure about this?" John whispered as they approached one of the courtrooms. Jordan gave a small nod. "Trust me. We need to see how they treat people like us when they think we're nobodies." For years they had studied law, dedicating their lives to understanding every loophole, every trick, every power move that played out in a courtroom. But more than that, they had witnessed injustice firsthand. They had seen judges dismiss people based on their skin color. They had watched prosecutors belittle those who couldn't afford a proper defense. They had sat in the back of countless courtrooms, watching defendants lose cases not because they were guilty, but because the system wasn't built to protect them. And they were going to change that. But first they needed to expose it. That morning, they had deliberately dressed down and taken seats in the back of Judge Gerald Whitmore's courtroom. They had heard whispers about him before people called him tough but fair. The truth was much uglier. They sat quietly as the case unfolded. A young black man, barely 22, stood trial for a robbery that had more holes than evidence. The defense attorney argued poorly, hesitantly that his client had an alibi, but Whitmore barely listened. He waved off objections. He scoffed at the young attorney's attempts to present evidence. He smirked when the defense requested additional time to present key witness testimony. And then Jordan saw at the moment he knew this was their fight. Whitmore laughed. A cruel, dismissive chuckle at the idea that a young black man before him could be innocent. John clenched his fists. Jordan exhaled slowly. They knew what they had to do. When court adjourned that day, they went home, dropped their disguises, and started preparing. They combed through every case Whitmore had presided over. They analyzed patterns of discrimination, cross-referenced legal loopholes he had exploited, and built an ironclad strategy. And 1 week later they walked back into that same courtroom. This time they weren't in the back. This time they weren't nobodies. This time they were attorneys. And Whitmore didn't recognize them. That was his first mistake. When the trial began, everything went as expected. Whitmore ignored them. He dismissed their objections. He threw out motions without a second glance. The prosecutor, Ethan Calloway, smirked every time the judge ruled in his favor. He thought he had already won. And then Jordan and John unleashed everything. They cited every case law, every legal precedent, every loophole Whitmore had ever abused. They used his own rulings against him. They dismantled the prosecution's case piece by piece. The judge's smirk faded. "You didn't expect us to actually know the law, did you, Your Honor?" John asked, his voice deceptively sweet. Whitmore slammed his gavel. "Enough of this nonsense." Jordan tilted his head. "Oh, but Your Honor," he said smoothly, "you didn't seem to mind nonsense when you were making fun of us a few minutes ago." A ripple of gasps spread through the courtroom. The judge's face darkened. He was losing control. His once steady hands gripped the gavel tighter, his forehead glistening with sweat. The prosecutors, once so sure of their victory, suddenly looked uncertain. The court officers shifted uneasily. The reporters scratched furiously at their notepads. And then, bam! The double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. A woman in a sleek black suit, her high heels clicking against the polished floor, strode in with purpose. John smiled. Because he knew exactly who she was. Federal investigator Angela Holloway. And she had come for Judge Whitmore. Angela Holloway didn't hesitate. She strode down the aisle, her presence slicing through the heavy silence like a blade. She was tall, poised, and carried the unmistakable air of someone who was here to end careers. The gold badge clipped to her belt gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and in her hands a thick manila folder one Jordan and John immediately recognized. It was theirs. The one they had sent her. The one that held everything. Judge Whitmore's grip on his gavel tightened. His once amused smirk had completely vanished, replaced by a clenched jaw and narrowed eyes. He shot a glance at the prosecutor's table, where Ethan Calloway sat, his confidence beginning to crack. Calloway shifted in his seat, glancing at the exit like a trapped animal. He knew what was coming. Angela reached the front of the room and turned to face Whitmore, her expression unreadable, but her tone was sharp as a blade. "Judge Whitmore," she said smoothly, "we need to talk." A hushed murmur spread through the courtroom. The reporters in the gallery nearly leapt out of their seats, pens scratching furiously against notepads. The bailiff, who had spent the last 20 minutes smirking at Jordan and John's treatment, suddenly looked very uncomfortable. Whitmore's fingers drummed against the bench. "Ms. Holloway," he said slowly, his voice measured, "I don't recall inviting federal investigators into my courtroom." Angela's lips twitched, almost like she wanted to laugh. "You didn't," she said coolly. "But considering the nature of the allegations against you, I'd say I have every right to be here." Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Jordan and John stood still, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with surgical precision. They had spent weeks planning for this exact moment. The research, the evidence, the perfect timing. Whitmore inhaled deeply, sitting back in his chair like a man trying to convince himself he still had control. Allegations, he repeated, feigning boredom. And what exactly do you think you have, Miss Holloway? Angela's smirk was slow, deliberate. She reached into her folder and pulled out the first document, holding it up for the room to see. Records of your rulings over the past 12 years. Analyzed and cross-referenced. Want to know what we found? Whitmore didn't respond, but the tick in his jaw gave him away. Angela turned the page, reading as if she were reciting his own crimes back to him. In 79% of cases involving black defendants, you ruled against them, even when presented with substantial evidence in their favor. In 94% of cases where a white defendant faced serious charges, you either reduced the sentence or dismissed evidence that would have led to a conviction. And in every single case where the prosecution was led by Ethan Calloway, you ruled in his favor. Another ripple of gasps. The reporters couldn't scribble fast enough. The spectators murmured, shifting in their seats. Whitmore's grip on his gavel was so tight his knuckles turned white. That's coincidence. Angela's eyebrows lifted slightly, as if she was amused by how pathetic that response was. Is it? She pulled another document. Because we also traced financial irregularities linked to your accounts. Large deposits transferred through shell corporations, all of which coincide exactly with major rulings in favor of specific high-profile cases. And do you know where some of those payments originated? She paused for effect, then turned the page, revealing a printout with highlighted transactions. Entities directly connected to Mr. Calloway's office. Now the gasps weren't just whispers. They were shouts. Calloway jumped to his feet. This is insane. His voice cracked. This is nothing more than a coordinated attack by two rookie attorneys looking for headlines. Angela turned to him, calm, composed. Rookie attorneys, she echoed, glancing at Jordan and John. Is that what you think? Calloway scoffed. This is theater. These two don't have the experience to. Jordan stepped forward, finally speaking. His voice was sharp, cutting through Calloway's unraveling confidence like a scalpel. Experience. You mean like how we've spent the last 3 weeks decimating every fraudulent case you've ever touched? You mean how we spent countless nights pulling records, finding patterns following the money? Or maybe you mean experience like yours where you bribe your way to convictions, destroy the lives of innocent people, and then sit back and laugh. Calloway's jaw clenched, but he had no response. Angela smirked. Since you're so concerned about their experience, she said smoothly, why don't we let the Justice Department decide? Because as of this morning, the Attorney General has signed an official investigation order against both of you. Silence. Then boom. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Court officers moved, unsure whether to contain the situation or simply step aside. Spectators murmured in shock. Whitmore's face had drained of color, his hands gripping the edge of his bench like it was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. Ethan Calloway looked like he was about to be sick. His face had gone pale, sweat glistening at his temples. His voice cracked. He tried again, weaker this time. I need a recess. Angela tilted her head. Oh, you're not going anywhere. The bailiff, who had moments ago been enjoying the mockery of Jordan and John, now hesitated, looking toward the judge for guidance. But Whitmore said nothing. John took a slow step forward, his voice low, cutting through the noise like steel. You really should have read our credentials, Your Honor. For the first time that day, Whitmore was speechless. The judge opened his mouth, then bam. The double doors burst open again. This time it wasn't one woman in a power suit. It was 6 federal agents. They moved quickly, efficiently, with a kind of presence that couldn't be ignored. The lead agent, a tall black man in a crisp navy suit, strode toward the front, flashing his badge. Gerald Whitmore, he announced, his voice ringing loud over the stunned murmurs. You are under federal investigation for judicial misconduct, bribery, and obstruction of justice. Whitmore inhaled sharply. You can't. We can, the agent interrupted. And we are. Calloway took an instinctive step back. This is all a misunderstanding," he stammered, his eyes darting around the room like a man looking for an escape route. Angela smirked. "You should sit down, Mr. Calloway." Calloway didn't. Instead, he turned and bolted. It was a desperate move. He barely made it 2 steps before 2 agents grabbed him, pinning his arms behind his back. This is a mistake," he howled. "You can't do this to me. I'm the prosecution." Jordan exhaled slowly. Not anymore. Whitmore was still frozen in his seat, hands trembling, his mind racing for a way out. But there was no way out. Not this time. The lead agent turned back to him. "Your Honor," he said, his tone almost mocking, "I suggest you come with us." Whitmore didn't move for a long moment. Then, slowly, he rose, adjusting his robe, desperate to maintain what little dignity he had left. But everyone in the room knew. It was over. John exhaled, rolling his shoulders back. He looked at Jordan, who met his gaze. No words needed. They weren't just winning. They were just getting started. The courtroom was still buzzing long after Judge Gerald Whitmore and Ethan Calloway were escorted out in handcuffs. Reporters swarmed the aisles, their voices overlapping as they called out questions, desperate to capture the fallout of one of the biggest legal scandals in years. Cameras flashed, pens scribbled, and the spectators, once entertained by Whitmore's mockery, were now whispering in hushed, frantic tones. Some looked shocked. Others, particularly those who had suffered under Whitmore's rulings, looked vindicated. Jordan and John Carter stood near the defense table, their arms crossed, their sharp suits still immaculate despite the storm they had just unleashed. They weren't celebrating, not yet. There was still too much work to do. Angela Holloway, standing beside them, exhaled sharply, sliding the last of her documents back into her folder. She glanced at them, her expression unreadable, then nodded slightly. "You two just made history today." Jordan smirked, adjusting his cufflink. "Not yet." John nodded. "But we will." Before Angela could respond, a loud commotion erupted from the hallway. The double doors to the courtroom slammed open again this time. The figure stepping inside wasn't a federal agent. It was Richard Galloway, the chief prosecutor of the district. The moment his polished black dress shoes hit the marble floor, the room shifted. The reporters turned, the whispers died down, and even the bailiffs who had stood motionless as their judge was arrested seemed to tense. Galloway was an imposing man in his mid-40s, tall, broad-shouldered, with an air of untouchability. He wasn't just another prosecutor. He was a kingmaker, the type who would power not because of what he did in the courtroom, but because of the favors he controlled outside of it. His connections stretched everywhere: judges, law enforcement, city officials. And he was furious. His dark eyes locked onto Jordan and John, then flicked briefly to Angela before settling back on them. He adjusted his suit jacket, forcing a thin-lipped smirk. "I have to say," he drawled, his voice calm but laced with warning, "I didn't expect a circus when I walked in here today." Jordan tilted his head. "Circus?" Galloway spread his hands, glancing around at the mess unfolding before him. "A federal investigation. Cameras everywhere. One of our most respected judges dragged out in cuffs. And for what? A few technicalities." His gaze hardened. "You two have no idea what you just did." John stepped forward, voice sharp. "We exposed a corrupt judge and a crooked prosecutor." Galloway's smirk didn't falter, but his eyes glinted dangerously. "You think this ends with Whitmore?" He shook his head, almost amused. "You think one judge, one prosecutor, is all there is?" He stepped closer, his presence almost suffocating. "You just burned down a bridge you didn't even know you were standing on." Angela folded her arms. "And what exactly is that supposed to mean?" Galloway barely glanced at her before refocusing on the brothers. "Do you know how this city works?" His voice dropped, almost a whisper. "Judges don't get to stay judges unless they play by certain rules. Cases don't just go away unless someone makes them disappear. And do you really think Ethan Calloway was the one making those decisions?" Jordan clenched his jaw. John exhaled slowly. Galloway smiled, slow, smug, knowing. Ethan was expendable. Whitmore. Expendable. You didn't take down the system. He leaned in slightly. You just pissed it off. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The weight of them settled over the room like a storm cloud. Then bam. The heavy wooden doors burst open again, this time with force. Two men in dark suits strode in, their movements sharp, precise, deliberate. They didn't look like federal agents. They didn't look like police. They didn't need to. Galloway barely reacted. Instead, he smirked, stepping back, glancing at his watch, as if this was exactly what he had expected. One of the men, tall, stocky, with piercing blue eyes, reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. He didn't hand it to anyone. He simply read it aloud. Jordan and John Carter. His voice was cold, emotionless. You are being summoned for immediate questioning regarding possible misconduct in your handling of legal evidence. Silence. Silence. John's hands curled into fists. Jordan's heartbeat slowed, but his mind was already racing. Angela stepped forward, her expression darkening. On what grounds? The second man, a leaner, more calculated figure, handed her a copy of the document. A warrant has been issued for the review of all case files submitted by Carter Law, effective immediately. Angela scanned the document quickly. Her eyes flashed with anger. This is bullshit. Galloway smiled. It's protocol. Jordan exhaled through his nose, slow, controlled. This is retaliation. Galloway's smirk widened. No, he said, his voice soft, condescending. This is how the game is played. The tension in the room crackled. Jordan and John were many things smart, calculated, prepared, but even they hadn't expected this level of counterattack so soon. Angela's grip on the document tightened. You're trying to bury them before they can get any deeper. Galloway exhaled, shaking his head slightly, as if disappointed. Angela, Hitzget, you think you're fighting injustice. But what you don't understand is this isn't just about a couple of bad rulings. This isn't even about justice. He took a step forward, lowering his voice just enough that only Jordan and John could hear. This is about power. Jordan's jaw clenched. John's eyes burned. And Galloway knew he had struck a nerve. He smiled, satisfied, then turned. Gentlemen, I suggest you come with them. The two men in suits didn't move. They didn't need to. The trap had already been set. Jordan inhaled slowly, glanced at John. No words were spoken. Then, together, they stepped forward. Because they weren't running. Not now. Oh. The interrogation room was cold, sterile, and designed to make people feel small. A single metal table sat in the center, accompanied by two uncomfortably stiff chairs. The overhead fluorescent light hummed softly, casting harsh shadows against the gray walls. A two-way mirror stretched across one side of the room, an obvious reminder that unseen eyes were watching. Jordan and John Carter sat side by side, their backs straight, their hands folded in front of them. They weren't nervous. They weren't rattled. If anything, they looked bored. Across from them, Agent Derek Cole, a sharp-jawed, government suit-wearing enforcer of the system, leaned forward, his hands splayed across the table. He had the look of a man used to owning the room, the kind of presence that made most people sweat under pressure. But Jordan and John weren't most people. Cole exhaled slowly, studying them like they were a puzzle he wasn't sure how to solve. Let me tell you how this works, he finally said, his voice low, methodical. Right now, you're being investigated for possible evidence tampering and misconduct. Now, that's a serious accusation, one that could cost you your careers, possibly more. Jordan tilted his head slightly. Let me guess, he said, voice dry. If we cooperate, you'll make this all go away. Cole smiled, slow and knowing. Something like that. John smirked. You're not even pretending this is real, are you? Cole shrugged. What's real is perception. Right now, the people you embarrass, the people you expose, they want you gone. And they have a lot of influence, a lot of pull. They can bury you in legal battles for years. So let's cut to the chase. He sat back, folding his hands. Hand over the rest of your files. Everything you've got on Whitmore, Calloway, and anyone else you're looking into. You do that. I make a few calls, and this, he gestured vaguely to the room, all disappears. Silence. Then Jordan let out a short breath, shaking his head. You know what's funny? Cole raised an eyebrow. Jordan leaned forward, his voice calm, controlled. You people always think you can scare us. You think you can intimidate us into backing down. John exhaled, mirroring his brother's movement. You don't realize we've spent our entire lives dealing with men like you. Cole's smile twitched just slightly. Jordan held his gaze. Let me tell you how this works. We knew the second Whitmore got taken down you'd send someone. We knew you'd try to silence us before we got any deeper. So before we ever walked into this room, he leaned back, crossing his arms. We sent everything we have to a secure location. If we disappear, or if anything happens to us, it goes public. Cole's expression darkened. You're bluffing. John's smirk widened. Are we? The room tensed, the air between them charged. Then bam. The door swung open, and Angela Holloway stormed inside, her face thunderous. That's it. This interview is over. She strode past Cole, slamming a folder down on the table. I just spoke to the Attorney General's office. You have zero legal grounds for this interrogation. There is no misconduct investigation. There was no formal complaint filed against these men. This is nothing more than an illegal intimidation tactic. Cole didn't move, his expression unreadable. Holloway, he said smoothly, you don't know what you're getting yourself into. Angela exhaled sharply, leaning down until she was eye level with him. No, Derek, you don't. Jordan and John exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement that Holloway had just thrown herself into the fight with them. Cole studied her for a long moment, then exhaled through his nose. Without another word, he stood, straightened his suit jacket, and turned for the door. This isn't over, he said over his shoulder. Angela didn't so much as blink. It never is. The door clicked shut behind him. Silence. Then John let out a low whistle. Well, that was fun. Angela shot him a glare. Do you two ever stop provoking people? Jordan smirked. Depends. Did it work? Angela sighed, rubbing her temple. Look, you bought yourself some time, but Cole is just a messenger. The real problem, she exhaled, it's Galloway. Jordan's smirk faded. John's expression hardened. Angela nodded. You already knew Whitmore and Calloway weren't working alone. But Galloway, he's not just protecting the system. He is the system. He's the one who built the network that's kept these corrupt judges and prosecutors in power for years. And if you think he's going to let two young attorneys burn it to the ground. She shook her head. He will kill you before he lets that happen. John exhaled slowly. Then we'd better make our next move fast. Angela narrowed her eyes. Tell me you have something. Jordan slid a USB drive across the table. Every case Galloway has ever manipulated. Every bribe. Every falsified charge. Every conviction that should have never happened. Angela picked up the drive, staring at it like it held the weight of the world. Where did you get this? Jordan's smile was cold. A few old friends in the DA's office don't like him either. John exhaled. Galloway's been untouchable for over a decade. But today, he leaned forward. That changes. Angela studied them for a long moment, then nodded. All right, she murmured. Let's end this. But before anyone could move. Bam! A deafening explosion rocked the building. The walls shook. The overhead light flickered. Sirens erupted outside. Angela's head snapped up. What the hell? Jordan was already moving, shoving the USB drive into his pocket, his mind racing. John pulled out his phone, checking the security feeds outside their office. His face darkened. We need to go. Now. Angela rushed to the window, peering outside. Her breath hitched. Black SUVs. No sirens, no markings, just men in suits stepping out, armed, moving fast. Jordan's jaw clenched. They're not cops. Angela's stomach dropped. They're here to eliminate you. John pulled open the emergency exit door. Then let's not be here when they do. They ran, because this wasn't just a cover-up anymore. This was a hunt. The city was on fire figuratively and literally. The explosion had sent tremors through the streets, a calculated move designed to create chaos and cover. Sirens blared in the distance, but the SUVs outside weren't law enforcement. No flashing lights. No official insignias. Just black tinted windows and armed men stepping out with the efficiency of a kill squad. Jordan, John, and Angela moved. They burst through the emergency exit, their feet pounding against the concrete as they ducked into the back alley. Angela pulled out her phone, quickly scanning for exits. We can't go out the front. They're boxing us in. Jordan exhaled, his mind racing. Then we take the underground. John's head snapped toward him. You sure? Jordan didn't hesitate. It's our best shot. Angela gave him a sharp look. What's the underground? Jordan didn't stop moving as he spoke. Back when we were still in law school, we worked with an ex-cop who ran off-the-grid tunnels under the city. They were used back in the 80s for off-book evidence drops. But now, they're just forgotten pathways. John grinned, and we're about to unforget them. They cut through a side street, slipping past the main road where the SUVs had begun spreading out. The men weren't rushing. They didn't need to. They knew Jordan and John had nowhere to go. But they were wrong. Jordan led them through a narrow passageway between two buildings, kicking aside an old metal grate. Beneath it, a set of concrete stairs disappeared into darkness. Angela hesitated for half a second. You're telling me this leads somewhere that isn't a dead end? John grinned. I'm telling you it leads somewhere they won't expect. No more questions. They slipped inside. The second they disappeared, the metal grate slammed shut, just as the sound of boots approached the alleyway. The men stopped just short of where they had been moments ago. A beat of silence. Then one of them muttered into a radio, they're off-grid. Switching to thermal. Inside the tunnel, Jordan didn't stop moving. The air was thick, damp, but more importantly safe for now. Angela exhaled, gripping her knees. Jesus, that was close. John chuckled. Close is how we live now. Jordan ignored them, his mind still working. This isn't just about retaliation anymore. They were going to kill us. No trials. No charges. Just erase us. Angela ran a hand through her hair. Galloway doesn't just want you silenced. He wants to make an example out of you. Jordan exhaled sharply. Then we take the fight to him. Angela gave him a sharp look. You better have a plan. Jordan's lips curled into something dark. We do. John smirked. And it's going to be messy. For 3 days they disappeared. No credit cards. No phones. Nothing that could be traced. They moved through safe houses, burning through the few allies they could still trust. The city was locked down. News reports framed them as rogue attorneys tampering with federal evidence. They had been labeled fugitives. Then, on the 4th day, they went on the offensive. Angela had spent years digging into Galloway's network of corruption, but she had never had the kind of leverage Jordan and John now possessed. The USB drive wasn't just evidence, it was a nuclear weapon. It contained records of every case Galloway had manipulated, every payout, every fabricated conviction. Jordan grinned as he scrolled through the files. He's been too confident. He never thought anyone would put the pieces together. Angela nodded. That's why we're going to make sure the entire world sees this. They couldn't take it to the press. Galloway had too many people on the inside. They couldn't go through official legal channels, those had already been compromised. So they went somewhere bigger. Live television. The Chicago Evening News was a fortress of security, but not the kind designed to keep people out. The news station thrived on chaos-breaking stories, live coverage, journalists hungry for their next scandal. And tonight, Jordan and John were the scandal. They slipped in through the back entrance during a routine delivery, using press badges Angela had forged. Once inside, they moved fast, cutting through the chaos of the newsroom. Past producers yelling into headsets, past camera crews prepping for the 6 o'clock live broadcast. Angela kept her voice low. You sure about this? John grinned. Absolutely not. Jordan exhaled, looking at the live schedule on the wall. The anchor was already mid-segment, covering their own manhunt. He smirked. This is poetic. Angela pulled out her phone, activating the remote upload. Once I hit send, this goes to every news station in the country. Jordan nodded. Then let's give them a show. They moved. The security guards barely had time to react before Jordan and John walked straight onto the live set. Gasps. Shouts. The anchor stuttered, eyes wide as the 2 most wanted men in the city strolled onto the stage. John flashed a grin. Sorry to interrupt, but we figured we should tell our side of the story. Jordan raised his hands, showing he wasn't armed. We're not here to hurt anyone. We just want the truth to come out. The cameras were rolling. Millions were watching. Angela's finger hovered over the button. Now? Jordan's eyes locked onto the camera lens. Now. Angela hit send. Instantly, every screen in the studio flickered. The teleprompter changed, the pre-planned news script vanished, and in its place Galloway's crimes. Every file, every case, every name. The entire country was watching. The anchor's face went pale. The security guards hesitated. And Galloway? He was watching too. The broadcast was a death sentence for him. And he knew it. Within an hour, the city was in chaos. Protesters flooded the streets. Officials scrambled. The DOI announced an immediate investigation. And Galloway? He ran. But Jordan and John weren't done. Because they knew one thing: Galloway didn't know where he was going. They found him at a private airstrip, a blacked-out sub idling near a waiting jet. Galloway was barking orders into his phone when he saw them. Jordan smirked. Going somewhere. Galloway's face twisted in fury. You don't know what you've done. John tilted his head. Pretty sure we do. Galloway lunged. But Angela was faster. The second he moved, she slammed a badge against his chest. Richard Galloway, you're under federal arrest. He froze. Then the flash of red and blue. FBI vehicles surged forward. Galloway's world ended in handcuffs. 3 days later, Jordan and John walked free. The charges against them dropped. Their names cleared. But as they stood on the courthouse steps, Angela at their side, the wind biting against their suits, John exhaled. This feels too easy. Jordan nodded. That's because it is. Angela's phone buzzed. She checked the message and her face paled. Jordan looked at her. What? Angela exhaled. Then she turned the screen toward them. One sentence. You think Galloway was the top? Keep looking. John's hands curled into fists. Jordan smirked. Guess we're not done yet. And with that they walked forward. Because the fight wasn't over. It was just beginning.